It's Ben with HRG Engineering. Today we are going to do an installation on a 2007 Honda Pilot. This is going to be the ultimate kit or candidate for today. 2007 Pilot. Looks pretty good as it is. I like these tires and wheels, and he's got a nice little roof rack on there with his little awning, and generally a good looking truck, but definitely, you know, we got to address this wheel gap right here. I like to have the wheel gap sort of the same as the sidewall of the tire. We're going to go up 3 inches. Right, so this is the ultimate kit for 2003 to 2008 Pilot. Got front spacers. These are front and rear subframe spacers. These are for the little brackets on the front subframe retainer brackets. Engine bolts. We've got bolts for the carrier bearing. These are the bolts for those brackets in the front I was talking about. This is a foam seal for where the steering shaft passes through the body. Rear upper control arms. We've got spacers for the drive shaft safety loops. These are the rear spring spacers. All the bolts. These are the sway bar end links, and these are the brake line extension brackets. So basically, the sway bar end links on these have to be just a little bit shorter because when you lift, it wants to push the sway bar end link down, which I'll show you in the video. And it sometimes can rattle against the lower control arm. So it comes with instructions. I get a lot of people asking if our kits come with instructions, which leads me to believe that there are a lot of kits sold out there without instructions, which is mind-boggling. But yeah, we have instructions, very detailed. And in fact, we're also going to do a QR code on these. It'll be leading you right to this video. We have most of these other kits covered with a QR code and a video, but this is the first time we've done the installation on video for the Pilot. This piece actually fits both Ridgeline and Pilot, and this QR code is going to show you how to install this particular piece, and I'll show you how that works. You just go to your QR code reader on the phone, which is that button right there if you have an iPhone, and then you just scan that code like so, and that's going to take you right to the YouTube video, and we'll have one of those for the Pilot kit as well. So that just kind of makes it easy, but I just want to show you guys, a lot of people don't know that this QR code actually leads to instructions, and we get people asking, do you have a video instructions, when the QR code is like right there on the piece. So the instructions themselves will also have a QR code printed on them, so you can scan. You won't even have to look at any of this paper. You can just scan the QR code and it will take you right to the video that I'm filming right now. First thing you want to do on these is, well, it says disconnect the negative battery terminal. I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to do that. First thing we're going to do is measure the height before we do the lift kit. And the way I measure is right at the fender lip. So looks like about 31 3/4. And the back, we've got about 31 1/2. That is our before measurement. So let's get into this lift kit. First part of this installation is going to be the subframe kit. The spring and strut spacers will come in afterward. So we're going to start there. We're going to start with subframe kit. Reason for the subframe kit going first is it makes everything else fit a lot easier. First thing we're going to do is jack up the front, get it off the ground, get it on some jack stands. One thing you could do that I think a lot of people don't think about is if you wanted to see what the car would look like with the lift kit on it, you could just literally jack the car up and measure before and after. We've just jacked this up 3 inches. You can see, I mean, I just got a floor jack under it, but you can see what it would look like after with the 3-inch kit. And this is hopefully where we're gonna end up. But as a quick test for somebody that doesn't know exactly how high they wanna go, you could just get a floor jack and jack it up, measure it obviously to see, you know, where it would end up, but go from there. So now you can see kind of before you even buy the lift kit, what it's gonna look like. All right, for all of you guys that are inevitably going to ask what size tires this has, I'm gonna show you. This has a 245/70/16, which is about a 29.5-inch tire. All right, we're gonna start off by taking the 2 bolts out of the passenger side engine mount. This is going to allow the engine to drop with the rest of the subframe. So it's easier to access it now before we jack the car up. So we'll take those 2 bolts out. We're going to put 2 1-inch by 1-inch spacers in between the bracket and the motor. And then these 2 M10/70 bolts are going to replace the factory ones. Now underneath here, we're going to take out all the little plastic clips and bolts that hold the plastic, I guess you'd call it a water shield or a splash shield underneath the engine. that has to come out to access the subframe. So there's a couple little plastic screws you have to take out and a couple little clips. If you have a panel tool or a screwdriver, just to pry those out, it makes it pretty easy. And you know, on the passenger, on the wheel well, it kind of goes in behind the fender liner, so you just have to pull that down to get it loose. You just pull on it, it'll come out, no problem. And then this one actually has a brush guard on it, so they've cut that plastic shield, but yours will be very similar to take off. You just pry these little pieces of plastic out to cut that burp out. I always take the plastic. I always put all my pieces of. I always put all the screws in a little box to keep them getting lost. Now underneath here we got 3 17mm bolts. 2 of them are for a retainer bracket. I guess that's what you'd call. It holds the like basically the subframe to the radiator support. So those 2 bolts come out. We won't be reusing those. And then this is the main subframe bolt, and we will be reusing that. Luckily for us, the subframe bolts are super long and they go in well past the threaded part of the frame, so we can reuse those. Now you're going to open up a gap. You can see when you drop that down, there's going to be a gap there, and that's exactly where we're going to put our spacers. Now it's very important that you don't take all the bolts out. Leave 2 of them in, because that's what keeps the subframe in alignment when you go to put it all back together. So now we've got these loose, and you can see there's one more bracket. This is on the back side, and that bracket, it just basically retains the bolt, and I guess it just keeps it from coming loose. I'm not really sure why it's there, but there's a 14mm bolt that holds that little tab on, and then a little nut that you take that off, and that little elbow shaped tab will come off. Then you've got a 17mm bolt that is your other main subframe bolt in the back. You can just pull that out, and you know, it doesn't matter which 2, but you definitely want to leave 2 bolts in to the subframe. You know, definitely don't take all 4 of them out. So we're gonna drop this down, and should give us enough room to just slip one of these little spacers in. These are aluminum spacers, 2.5 by 1 inch spacers. So when you find those in your instructions, you'll know which one it is. We're going to reuse these factory bolts. As you can see, there's plenty of thread engagement on these, even with the 1 inch spacer in there. So we're going to just run those in ever so carefully, obviously, to put these back in. Now there's going to be a longer bolt and a M12 by 1 inch spacer, as you can see, and then the M12 by 50 bolts are going to go in on that little retainer bracket right there. And just tighten those up. Don't go too tight, but you know, I always do 2 to 3 ugga-duggas and it's good to go. Again, you want to put that nut back on that little elbow shaped tab, and the factory bolts, just reuse those. I usually torque those to about 1,500 foot-pounds and call it a day. So, and then on the back side, you're going to do that same process. You've got 2 more pucks that go in the back, and same thing. These are actually the front, excuse me. I think we may move to the back in just a second, but those are the bolts. We're going to just retain those factory bolts, throw it back in, and in this front bracket, there's going to be 2 more of the M12 1 by 1.25 spacers that go in between those brackets. And in this case, we didn't actually need to, yeah, there you go. 2 more of those bolts, and then 2 more M12 by 50 bolts that go in. Now this kind of flexed down. As you can see, it didn't look like the bolt got a lot of thread engagement, but it actually does once we push that bracket up. Now back up to the top, you can see we've got the motor drop down a little bit, just enough to get those M10 spacers in between the bracket and the motor mount itself. And it's kind of a tight squeeze. You got to get your hands down in there. But if you can get your hand in there, you know, get somebody with little arms and snake your hands down in there to put the spacers in. It's kind of a pain in the butt, you know, but you know, just slide those spacers in between. You got your two M10 by 70 bolts. And you know, one of the things you may have to do is adjust the height of the engine with the jack just to get those to line up easy where they'll thread in by hand. That's why I always make sure that they'll thread in by hand before I do anything else. As you can see, I was able to do that. Just thread them in, and then, you know, and tighten them on up with the ratchet, and you're good to go on that. That's all there is really to the front subframe kit, is just doing that. Alright, now this is a two-wheel drive model, but in the four-wheel drive you'll have a drive shaft carrier bearing that goes right there, and then a drive shaft safety loop that would be bolted right there, and there's actually another one in the back, and that's where your M8 spacers will go. And right here we've got the subframe kit, or subframe bolts for the back. I'm going to take those out. Again, you don't want to take all four of them out, just take two of them out and then thread them back in, just enough to let it drop down. There's only four. The back is super easy. It's just 4 bolts. You don't have any retainer brackets. So you're going to slide one of the spacers in just like in the front, and then you're going to replace the factory bolts with the M14 by 135s in the kit. And that's all it is 4 of those and you're done. The back is super easy as far as subframe. Now we're going to do the trailing arm spacers. You take out these 4 bolts here. Again, you don't want to take both bolts out. Leave one of them in. In fact, I usually just use one of the new bolts to hold it in place so it doesn't get out of alignment. Take the bolts out. You got your M14 1 by 1.25 spacers that go in there, and then your M14 by 90s that replace the factory bolts. Again, you want to be very careful with these. They tend to cross thread very easily. Ask me how I know that. So just be really careful getting them in there so that you don't cross thread. Now back here we got to take the rear sway bar link out, and I always recommend spraying with WD-40 just to get it loose. And right here you've got a ABS line, 2 10mm bolts to take that out, and that comes out of the way. Drop that down. And of course you still have to take the sway bar end link off, and this sometimes can be a pain in the butt. I've had to cut them before. This one wasn't too bad. I was able to use a pair of vice grips to hold it in place while I took the bolt out. And just be careful not to damage that rubber boot. This would be a good time to just replace those if you were going to do some more stuff on your suspension. So the rear spacers, you've got your rear spring isolator. You want to reuse that, and that goes in the top, and then the spring goes underneath just like it was before. So it sits right there. And in this kit I actually filmed 1.5-inch rear spacers, but this kit takes a 2-inch rear spacer. We were just experimenting a little bit in the video. So that's with the 2-inch spacer installed right there. And then you've got you can see the shock extension that goes on the end of the shock there. Now to compress the spring, you just use the jack and just lift it up to meet up with the wheel hub, and then you can slide the bolt in fairly easily. You just have to push it up with the jack, and then you can get the bolt in, no problem. As you can see, it fits nice and flush, nice and tight, and you still have a lot of slack on the brake lines, no problem there. Just put your sway bar end link back in, and I still had to use a pair of vice grips to hold it in place. You drop the nut on the ground a couple times to get it tight. But like I said, it would be a really good time to replace those if they're really rusted. And a lot of them are rusty and they won't come out no matter what you do. So yeah, that's something, just maintenance stuff you could do. And I always recommend just checking everything before you do the kit, just to make sure you have all the parts before you get started. But there you have it. That's the back end done. And of course you want to tighten all these bolts. Put your bolts back in for your ABS lines. We're going to tighten the bolts for the shock extensions, which I don't show in this video, but obviously you know what to do. Just tighten them up. That's your shock extension right there. And that pretty much takes care of the back end. And you can see there's still room for the exhaust. It doesn't hit on the bottom of the pilot. But obviously if you wanted to do some longer
muffler hangers, you could do that to get a little bit more room if you were worried. But in this case, it seems to fit just fine and doesn't clunk. Now in the front, we're going to start with the strut spacers and taking off the brake lines. You got a 12 millimeter bolt right there, and then another 12 millimeter bolt for the other brake line in the back. And then you've got your sway bar end link. You know, just take those out. You're not going to reuse those, so just take them out and you're going to throw those away because the kit comes with shorter ones. So there's, you know, take that out for your ABS line, and then there's going to be the two main bolts that hold the strut to the wheel hub, and you're going to take, I think that's a 22 millimeter bolt, or a nut rather, and you just take those out to get that out. Just take those out. Now everything's loose. We're going to go up to the top, and you know, I've found that it is easier just to pull this whole cowl up, and those little plastic pieces under that rubber weather strip will just pop right out. There are access panels up here as you can see, but it is very difficult to get a tool down into those holes. So I just pry that whole thing up. It's much easier to access all the bolts. You know, this is something that Jake actually taught me because I was doing it the hard way this whole time. And that cowl, it just pulls right up. You just take the little pieces loose with a panel tool. But see, as you can see, now you can get your whole hand in there, you get a tool in there. Much easier than doing it the hard way like I used to do. So once you've got those bolts out, take the bottom big bolts out, and the strut will just pop right out. Now you want to be careful that you don't pull on the axle, because the inner CV joint will come loose, and then you'll have a problem that you have to solve, and you don't want to have to do that if you don't have to. So I usually use like a bungee cord to tie up the hub, and just to make sure that that axle doesn't pop out of the socket. So now we're going to put the spacer on just using the factory nuts. You know, the 3-inch kit comes with bolts that come in from the top. So basically you want to loosen up the lower control arm bolts to allow everything to drop down enough to get the spacers and the strut in. But once you get them in there, you know, drop the bolts in from the top, and it's pretty easy to get them lined up if you have a helper. It's very difficult if you're by yourself because the struts are really heavy. But once you get it mounted at the top, you can just push the strut back toward the body or toward the frame, and then move the wheel hub over. Don't pull the wheel hub out around the strut, or you will get that axle out of that inner CV, and that's a bad thing. Now these are your eccentrics. This is a 17, it's actually a 16 millimeter camber bolt for the older Pilot, and the newer ones have a 17 millimeter camber bolt. This is the eccentric bolt that allows you to adjust the camber on the front wheels. And as you can see, you just snug it down in there with that washer facing that way, and then you just use the factory bolt in the bottom hole. If you have really bad camber problems, you can put 2 camber bolts in. It gives you twice as much adjustment. But as you can see, when I turn the bolt, if you look closely, you can see the top of the wheel hub move in and out, and that is what gives you your positive and negative camber adjustment. So the last thing you want to do is bolt up your brake line extension brackets, put in your new sway bar end links and your ABS line, and you're good to go under the car.
All right, we got one more important step to do underneath the dash, and I've already removed this plastic piece. It's basically the plastic covering that goes over the steering shaft here. There's a couple of little plastic screw thingies that hold it on. So you want to take this thing off right here. That allows you to access where your universal joint passes through the firewall here. And the process here is going to be a lot like rolling fenders. So I've actually already done this because I couldn't do it and film at the same time, unfortunately. And I'm doing this by myself, so I can just show you the result. So I use this large screwdriver here, and I put this down in between this coupler and the metal. The metal is just real thin sheet metal. And then when you turn the wheel, it rolls this just like you're rolling a fender. It rolls it right against this metal, and it gives you that little bit of room that you need. So you don't even have to cut anything. You can cut it if you wanted to, if you feel more comfortable doing it that way. To me, this is just a little bit easier, and it's just as fast. So one more important thing especially with these Pilots, is sometimes you'll have a little dead spot in the steering. It'll have like a little clunk to it. That's normal. And there's an easy fix, and I'll show you exactly what it is. Okay, so if you have a Pilot, you just did a kit, and you have a little bit of a clunk in the steering, it's so easy. All you have to do is loosen this bolt. It's going to adjust. This is gonna slide out just a tiny little bit, just enough. Tighten it back up, and then you will be good to go. No clunks, no nothing. And that has happened a few times to customers. It doesn't do it on every one. Super easy. But that's it, guys. Pretty much done. Put the wheels back on in the front. I gotta tighten everything up after it's on the ground and then see what we got. I think it's gonna look awesome. All right, guys, we're gonna talk about one last important step on the installation, and that is after the car's on the ground, you wanna tighten up all the control arm bushings, which we had to loosen this one up to allow that arm to drop. Now that it's on the ground, we can go ahead and tighten that back up. And that just helps prolong the life of your suspension bushings because it tightens them up in the neutral position where the car is going to spend most of its time. Do that front and back. That's all you got to do. All right, guys, that is the end result of the 3-inch Ultimate Lift Kit on a 2007 Honda Pilot. And I think it looks pretty good. The only thing I want to tell you guys is, of course, I have to say results may vary. This thing has over 245,000 miles on it, and the suspension is, I'm sure, the original stuff. It looks all original, and it's pretty saggy as is. I don't expect to get a full 3 inches out of this. I'm gonna measure here in a second, but I think it's probably gonna be around 2.5. If you do brand new shocks, struts, and everything else, it actually does help lift it a little bit along with the lift kit, so it all kind of works in conjunction to get you 3 inches of lift. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and do a quick measurement anyway, just to see what we got. I'm going to measure it at the fender the same way we did before, and we are at about 35. Again, we're measuring from the center of the wheel, about 35 in the back too. But these wheels have a really low offset. As you can see, they stick out from the fenders a good bit. When you have a really low offset wheel like that, the tire ends up like back here more when you turn the wheel. It like doesn't tuck in as much. So he might be able to go a little bit bigger, but there's probably gonna have to be some trimming of plastic and things like that. It looks like he's already contacting right here. I mean, that's been before the lift, obviously. Yeah, I think this thing looks really good. This is a well-balanced look. I know he's gonna be happy with this thing. I'm happy with this thing. So that's it, there you have it. That's the finished product, and I appreciate you guys watching to the end, and I'll see you in the next video. So anyways, that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you guys soon in the next video. God damn it. All right, there you have it. That's the end result of the 3-inch Ultimate Lift Kit on the 3. God dang it, how can I not get this right? I fuck it up every time. It takes a lot of tries.